Thank you very much for being with us today. I'm really grateful you could make it here despite the COVID-19 pandemic and your daily duties. Thankfully, there's no rain today. That would have been even more difficult after these challenging times. I'm welcoming you as the director of the Dialogue for Europe, a Brussels-based think tank that I founded with a few voluntary friends back in 2014. Our think tank, Dialogue for Europe, in cooperation with the Ankara-based ABKAD, European Union and Global Research Association, is currently implementing a project called Strengthening Dialogue between the EU and Turkey in the area of migration and security. This project, funded by the European Union, under supporting civil society dialogue between the EU and Turkey grant scheme, made it possible for us to be here today. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to our Turkish delegates. This civil society dialogue conference on migration, together with other activities that will take place this week, a networking dinner with EU institutions, meetings with DG NEAR, DG Home, and European External Action Service, Turkish permanent representation, several MEPs and media representatives, as well as a second conference at the VUB University, constitutes the first leg of our one-year project, which was launched in April 2021. As part of the second leg of the project, 6 Belgian delegates will participate in a series of activities in Turkey and engage with policymakers, academics, civil society representatives, media, and refugee groups to increase civil society dialogue in the area of migration and security. The third leg of our project will focus mostly on security, bringing together security experts from Belgium and Turkey in a conference in the European Parliament and in a Belgian university, while engaging in security dialogue with the European Commission, the European External Action Service, civil society organizations, academia, media, and refugees once again. We believe that migration and security cooperation go hand in hand, but cooperation should not focus solely on these two areas, of course. Today we are here to discuss about the fate of the million of refugees and migrants in Turkey and in the EU. I'm also welcoming you as a refugee, or as a migrant as they call me in Turkey. My personal story is probably the reason why this project is so close to my heart. As a 6-year-old Bulgarian citizen of Turkish origin, I was subject to forced migration under Todor Zhivkov regime back in 1989. Following the so-called revival process, which involved a name change campaign of the entire Turkish minority in Bulgaria, I was bullied by my peers and neighbors as the other because of my ethnicity, religion, language, and culture. My father, who was a judge and human rights activist, was given 3 days to pack his luggage and leave, or he was going to face a charged-up prison sentence, or even worse, be sent to a concentration camps like Belene. My family could have chosen to apply for asylum in Canada or Switzerland, but given the time constraint, family ties, and geographical proximity, they opted for Turkey. Our car was part of a large convoy, accompanied by police forces who were given permission to shoot us if we left the convoy before reaching the Turkish border. I still remember this one-week-long voyage as it were a dream, where we were bathing with my mom in a nearby river, or watching the stars on the car roof with my dad. But for my parents, it must have been a nightmare to start over a new life after leaving their home and property behind, with no job prospects, limited language skills, and millions of unknowns. In a lucky turn of events, and maybe good migration governance policies back then, they were given immediate citizenship in Turkey, attended integration courses where they learned about the Turkish language and history, occasionally with my help, of course, and found appropriate vacancies matching their qualifications. As for my part, I had the opportunity to start primary school in Ankara, where I skipped the first class of being, in spite of being the only immigrant pupil. I graduated from high school as a valedictorian, obtained my undergraduate diploma with high honors, and benefited from the EU-funded Jean Monnet Scholarship to complete my master's degree in London and Paris, which in turn permitted me to dedicate time and effort to EU-Turkey relations during my career at the OECD, European Parliament, as well as private and NGO sectors. I'm utterly grateful to Turkey for openly welcoming and successfully integrating me in the midst of a humanitarian disaster, which saw the mass exodus of some 500,000 people like me, the biggest forced migration in history following the Holocaust. If that door would have been stayed closed, I would have been denied a future, or even worse, become yet another invisible face or voice in a mass ethnic assimilation and cleansing campaign, as the likes of Srebrenica. I'm very grateful to Belgium for becoming my home away from home and giving me full citizenship rights, probably due to my excellent records in tax payments, of course. I'm also extremely grateful to the EU for making the lives of the Turkish minority in Bulgaria much easier. Largely due to a democratic transition and due to the European integration process, they can now enjoy greater rights and freedoms. But of course, this is something our esteemed MEP guest İlhan Küçük could tell you more about. At present, we are facing worse humanitarian disasters in Syria and in Afghanistan after decades of war and conflict, which pose common challenges for both the EU and Turkey. While cooperation in the field of migration became an important pillar in the EU-Turkey relations, it also led to populist discourse against migrants and increasing fear against the other in most EU countries. Combined with the terrorist threats and preoccupations about possible job losses, the phenomenon of migration largely contributed to the rise of right-wing parties in the EU. At the same time, an anti-immigrant rhetoric is becoming more and more prominent in Turkey. Having received around 5 million refugees, most of them being Syrians under temporary protection status, since 2015, Turkey has been one of the most affected countries by the migratory flow. Actually, probably the most affected country. Hence, addressing these challenges in a timely manner is of paramount importance for both the EU and Turkey. They're bound to work together to enable better integration of refugees in Turkey and the EU, to address the root causes of migration and its possible societal effects, as well as new challenges caused by regional conflicts. But while doing so, they should never forget that they are dealing with actual human beings who have little hope to return to their homes, who face prosecution upon their return. They're dealing with human beings whose rights, such as asylum and non-refoulement, are protected under international law. They're dealing with human beings who deserve a decent future, instead of unwelcoming authorities who treat them like aliens, who shoot at them at the borders, or who erect fences or walls against them. The EU-Turkey statement of 2016 was the first step in the right direction, but is it adequate given the current circumstances? What about the future of EU-Turkey relations with accession negotiations stalled, the visa liberalization promises unfulfilled, and customs union that is long due a revamp? As it stands, it may be hard to talk about a positive agenda, but we definitely need one. And we need one, we need not only positive messages, but positive actions. Without further ado, let me introduce to our panel MEP İlhan Küçük, dear Dr. Kurt Leboeuf, Samuel Westerbay, Ambassador Selim Kuneralp, and Professor Hatice Yazgan. And please, I would like to welcome our MEP guest İlhan Küçük to give some welcoming and introductory remarks. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, dear Ambassador, dear guests. First of all, I would like to thank the Dialogue for Europe for inviting me to this Presscope meeting today, and I apologize for not being able to host you at the European Parliament due to the COVID-19 circumstances. I'm glad to see so many civil society actors here today to discuss this important topic, and commend you on your EU-funded project on Turkey-EU civil society dialogue for migration and security, whose overall objective is achieving alignment of migration, foreign security, and defense policies between Turkey and EU, as foreseen in the association negotiations. Civil society has an important role to play in raising awareness about the causes and positive effects of migration, to achieve better mutual understanding about common challenges, and to bring citizens and different cultures, political and economic systems closer together. As the Vice Chair of European Parliament's delegation to the EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee, JPC, I've been working on EU-Turkey relations for many years. In the Committee on Foreign Affairs, we are regularly holding debates on Turkey. For instance, we discuss the external EU trust funds and Turkey refugee facilities this October. Being at the EU southeastern frontiers, Bulgaria is one of the main routes used by people trying to reach Europe from the Middle East and Afghanistan. So strengthening cooperation between the Bulgarian and Turkish authorities, as well as the EU and Turkey in general, to prevent irregular migration flows is of crucial importance. Migration cooperation between European Union and Turkey is becoming more and more indispensable given the situation in Syria and other places around the world. So being the EU's sixth largest trading partner, Turkey has also proved to be a strong ally of the West in the area of security and defense within the framework of NATO since 1952. During the Cold War, Turkey assumed a crucial responsibility on NATO's security architecture as the defender of the southeastern wing front of the alliance, in addition to contributing to the number of security operations. Saying that, I think Turkey is playing an important role in European energy security following the completion of the Southern Gas Corridor and other potential energy projects. These long-standing and strategic ties should be also translated into diplomatic relations between the EU and Turkey, which have been hampered by recent developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. Both EU and Turkey shall seek inclusive and constructive approaches and avoid unilateral steps when dealing with such sensitive issues, while the current global political conjuncture may be conducive to chaotic foreign policy decisions, lacking foundations, vision and coherence. The consequences of isolating a long-term partner and ally shall be carefully considered by EU member states. At the same time, Turkey shall continue to play a bridge role between East and West while contributing to its diversity and respecting its values. A fruitful and long-term cooperation in the field of migration and security could perhaps give a new impetus to EU-Turkey relationship and to some progress on the accession negotiations, which have been stalled for several years. In fact, migration and security are key areas where Turkey is an indispensable ally for the EU. Of course, the EU has to do its own part of burden sharing, and Turkey shall resume readmission of returnees from Greek islands, which was suspended since March 2020. An EU-Turkey high-level dialogue on migration and security should also be very timely. In addition, talent partnerships, such as the existing ones with North Africa and the countries in North African alliance could be extended to Turkey. In theory, the domestic political situation in Turkey need not to block a planned upgrade on the EU-Turkey customs union, as EU leaders are no longer insisting that the upgrade depends on Ankara improving human rights and the rule of law. Last but not least, anti-migrant populism shall be countered both in Turkey and in the EU. The rise of far-right parties in the EU and the recent anti-migrant riots on the streets in Turkey are hinting towards increasingly hostile environment for refugees and migrants both in Turkey and in the EU. Just to thank you before that, I would like to reiterate that being part of the European Parliament together with our colleagues and friends, we will continue cooperating on the important issues as you are going to discuss today with the distinguished panel, and I'm looking forward for fruitful discussion and good conclusions, which will benefit both European citizens but also Turkish citizens. Thank you, Eli, for inviting me once again.
So I think we could start with the Distinguished Ambassador who's been working a lot on EU-Turkey relations as ambassador also in the EU, but in other countries like Sweden and Korea. Dear Ambassador, could you briefly talk to us about the general EU-Turkey partnership and the challenges and opportunities that they're facing in that partnership?
Should I do it from my seat or should I go over there?
I think you can continue the panel here if you feel comfortable with this. Or would you like to take it?
I might as well do
okay,
that.
sure. Please.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Member of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be back in Brussels after a number of years, and I'd like to start by thanking Dialogue for Europe and the Press Club for hosting this meeting and giving me the opportunity of addressing this distinguished audience. I have to stress right at the beginning that I'm a retired diplomat, and therefore my views are certainly do not represent those of the Turkish government, nor do they represent the views of the necessarily the views of the civil society institution of which I remember, and whose name, no, you can't see it here. Anyway, I have retired, from the Turkish Foreign Service a number of years ago, and I'm quite happy to share my views on the subject that Eli has mentioned. Now, challenges and opportunities in the relationship between Turkey and the European Union. Well, certainly challenges, there are many of them, and I will try to outline what I see to be the most important ones in the few minutes that I've been allotted to, and of course, I'd be quite happy to answer questions later when we have the question and answer session. I think that the main challenge that our relationship faces these days is how to adapt to the situation where, much to my regret, the accession process of Turkey is, to say the least, on hold for the realistic perspective. I don't want to go into the details and the reasons for that situation. They have their sources both in Turkey and the EU, and of course it would take much more time than I've been asked to speak on to do justice to all of these things. Nor is it my intention to apportion blame and responsibility for this situation between Turkey and the EU. But the fact is that the blockage in the accession process of Turkey is not unique. When you look at the Balkan situation, and just about a week ago, there was this meeting in Slovenia, where the EU found itself unable to even suggest a target date for the accession of what are known as the Western Balkan countries. All this despite the fact that at least one of them has been negotiating for about 15 years. Another one has been waiting for accession negotiations to start for the same period of 15 years. All this because enlargement, as you all know much better than I do, since you're all sitting in Brussels, enlargement has a bad reputation. And it has acquired this bad reputation because, let's face it, the big bangs of 2004 and 2007 has not produced the desired outcome. Several Eastern European countries, though I know that the term Eastern European countries, which belongs to my generation, is no longer very popular. But the fact is that several of these countries have failed to converge with Western Europe, at least in terms of values. And the failure has led to a lot of disappointment among the major members of the European Union, and has pushed them to turn their back on further enlargement. Oddly, I have to say, while this is reality, no one seems to stop to think whether things would have been better if all of these countries had not been admitted into the European Union some 15, 17 years ago. But be that as it may, it is clear that by stepping away from further enlargement, The EU has lost its leverage over the candidate countries, not just Turkey, but the Western Balkans. It is rather difficult, I would say, to convince people that they need to align on the acquis of the European Union, since the acquis, at the end of the day, only applies to members of the European Union. So if you're not going to be a member, why should you align on the acquis? And as far as my own country is concerned, it is a fact that not even lip service is given to the objective of accession. But the fact is also that Turkey and the EU are condemned to live together. You cannot change the facts of geography. And they don't have the luxury of turning their backs on each other. They have too many interests in common. Even though I grant you that in the present political atmosphere, Turkey and the EU can be described more as or better as frenemies than friends. But this is the result of perceived hostility, which is voiced in a sort of in the rhetoric of the relationship, and this hostility would not survive, in my experience, the resumption of serious dialogue between the two, which I hope will start in the not too distant future. But meanwhile, our relationship has been reduced to a transactional one. The speakers who will follow me will speak about migration issues, and I will not dwell on them because these speakers are much more competent than me to speak about them. But the fact is that the migration challenge shows that when there is political will, the two sides can do things together. So that is what we need to focus on. The EU and Turkey face common challenges in the shape of climate change, the pandemic, the fight against terrorism, and many others. And concurrently, the world is also changing. We're moving away from globalization, and that is regrettable, but it's also a fact. And we're moving towards a more fractured setup where regionalism will have a bigger weight. And it is clear that the EU's decarbonization objectives cannot be met without the active contribution of Turkey, which has finally, I have to say, ratified the 2015 Paris Agreement. So the biggest challenge that the two sides face is a change in their respective mindsets. They need to go back to the spirit that prevailed in the past, when they saw each other as strategic partners rather than rivals. I'm old enough to remember, as an active participant, the time when the customs union was completed between Turkey and the European Union back in 1995, or indeed the 1999 Helsinki Council, where a decision was taken to grant candidate status to Turkey. And I remember the euphoria, because that is the right word, that both events generated in Turkey at the time. EU flags were displayed everywhere in Turkey, and people really thought that membership was just around the corner. Difficult political problems, such as the relationship with Greece and Turkey, were addressed with enormous goodwill in Turkey at the time. And also sincere efforts at domestic reform were made, with results that were welcomed among Turkey's partners everywhere, and not just in Europe. And it is as a result of that accession negotiations started back in 2004, and the Commission decided that Turkey had fulfilled the Copenhagen criteria sufficiently for that objective. I won't dwell on the Cyprus problem, but I would say that for the EU, the biggest challenge it has to confront in its relationship with Turkey is the need to overcome the obstacle that Cyprus poses in all areas, including accession negotiations and the modernization of the customs union. It is clear that for reasons that I touched upon earlier, accession is no longer an option, at least for the foreseeable future. Moreover, any and every member of the Union retains the power of veto over the process at every stage. Of course, it might be considered rather hypocritical to restart accession negotiations without the intention of concluding them. But the fact is that these negotiations are the only mechanism that the EU has for steering countries in the right direction. And this applies not just to Turkey, as I said earlier, but indeed to the Western Balkans. So I would say that what the EU needs to do is to tone down the rhetoric and convince Cyprus that continuation of the accession process is in that country's best interests too. And the same for the customs union, whose modernization is blocked for political reasons. Deepening the customs union to add missing chapters, including agriculture, services, government procurement, dispute settlement, and governance, would require lengthy negotiations over many years. But they would also force Turkey to open its market in all those areas to the benefit of the EU, and indeed, I would say, to the benefit of the Turkish consumer. At a time when lengthy supply chains have been shown to be vulnerable to the pandemic disruption and other factors, it is also in the EU's best interest, I think, to shorten these supply chains by using sources that are close to home. And Turkey can play a useful role in that regard. Of course, some people will probably retort that returning to normal relations might reward the present administration in Turkey, despite the fact that it has been moving away from European values for many years. But as I have already said, the process in both the case of accession negotiations and the deepening of the customs union would in fact be fully controlled by the EU. Re-engaging with Turkey would have the benefit of changing the direction the country has been taking away from the West, out of the spite that the leadership has been feeling for what it sees as humiliation on the part of the European Union. In fact, the majority of the Turkish population still sees its place in Europe, and positive gestures on the part of the EU would be welcomed by public opinion. At a time of approaching elections, the leadership would not be able to ignore such a change of mood in the population. Indeed, it might even feel that normalization would bring back the foreign capital which has fled Turkey in recent years, partly as a result of the deteriorating relations with the EU. And this would certainly be welcomed by the leadership. Re-engagement would also require resumption of alignment on the acquis, and this would greatly benefit the majority of the Turkish population, but that is worried by the deterioration in the rule of law that has accompanied the country's distancing from the EU. So finally, a few words about defense and security. As we all know, the Afghanistan fiasco and the rather casual way in which the United States has treated its European allies has spurred a fresh debate about building an autonomous European defense structure. After the departure of the United Kingdom, the only credible European army is that of France. Clearly, France on its own cannot fulfill the gap caused by the perceived distancing of the US from its European allies. At the moment, Turkey cannot play a role in such a structure, both because relations with the EU are too bad to permit it, and because its attempts at inclusion have been blocked again because of Cyprus. However, normalization and a fresh approach to the Cyprus problem would change the whole scenery in a very positive way. So I will stop here, and naturally, you know, if time allows, I'd be quite happy to try to answer your questions later on. Thank you very much.
For your valuable contribution. Of course, there is seemingly an enlargement fatigue, as you mentioned, and problems that Cyprus have to be overcome for the relationships to advance. But we had a meeting at the DG NIR of the European Commission yesterday, and we discussed about extensive issues, not only migration and security, but other avenues of cooperation between the EU and Turkey. And as we agreed, it is actually beneficial for both sides to continue to cooperate, even though there is no perspective of membership or there is no goal in the end. Oh, yes. Okay, oh, sorry, you hear me better now? No, I'm not used to microphones. It would be both beneficial for Turkish and the Turkish society and the European society to continue to cooperate in all the negotiation chapters. There are 35 of them, and to keep aligning their legislation. So with these words, I would also like to give the floor to Dr. Kurt de Boeuf, who's been writing a research paper for our project. He's an expert on Syria and the Middle East, and he worked in the Middle East Tahrir Institute, and he wrote a fantastic book about tribalization that I really recommend you to read. And he's been working on EU-Turkey relations as well, like, as part of his duties with the former Prime Minister of Belgium. And right now, of course, he's at the VUB University, an associate researcher and a fellow researcher at Oxford University, and also the EU Observer editor. So I'm going to give you the floor so that you can explain us how you evaluate the integration of refugees in the EU, and especially in the EU, because we are looking for a Belgian and European perspective in this paper as well, and what you see the avenues, possible avenues of cooperation in the future. Thanks, Kurt de Boeuf.
Thank you very much, Illy. Let me perhaps first tell you about the first time I came in real contact with Syrian refugees. I was living in Cairo, and there were quite a lot of refugees coming to Cairo. And with a few of them, I decided to go to northern Syria, which was 2012, 2013. We went to Azaz, so from El Bab border crossing, and apart from the destruction, which was of course horrible, also the human situation and actually the people living in a few camps. And let me just describe one of these camps. That was the end of 2012, which is December, snowing, it was very cold, and there was this camp in Azaz, which is not very far from Gaziantep, on Syrian territory, for all clarity. There were 20,000 people in this camp, and there was no electricity, there was no heating, and there were no real toilets. The only food that was there was for one meal, and they didn't know how to kind of feed these people for the next day. As a matter of fact, there were 8,000 children in that camp, and there was no milk. So, and when I was looking around and see, I mean, how can these people survive, not just this one day, but also the next day, I saw that all the promises and from the United Nations and the Red Cross about helping people also in rebel area and northern Syria was actually not happening. There was no any aid coming there. And the only aid that was coming there, in the northern part, actually came from Turkey and from Saudi Arabia. So the entire discourse I have been hearing for a long time in international fora didn't make sense. So I wrote an article about it, and the ICRC was very angry with me. But I think it showed to me at that point, and also later, the actual role of Turkey in everything which has to do with the Syrian refugee crisis. And in total, in 2020, in total 6.8 million Syrians have fled their country, and 3.5 million of them, and even more, are actually settled in Turkey. When Europe is saying that many European political parties are advocating for that refugees should be welcomed in the region, not in Europe. I mean, they don't really apparently care about the figures because they are already welcomed in the region rather than being in Europe. So on top of that, it's interesting to know that 25% of the total global refugee population is actually Syrian. So what happened that from 2012-13 that people were actually living in camps in Syria, but also in Lebanon and in Gaziantep and many other cities in Turkey, when they started to come to Europe in 2015. I think many do not really understand what was going on in this moment, in this summer actually, in 2015, and from the beginning of 2015 on. First of all, there was still the brutal civil war. Secondly, there was the brutal governance of ISIS in many parts in Syria, I mean, which people wanted to flee, I mean, which is quite obvious. Three, the lack of safety and human conditions in many refugee camps inside Syria, just as I said. And four, let us not forget, the changed policy towards Syrian refugees by Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. Because in Egypt, the military had taken power against the Muslim Brotherhood, and they, in their mind, the Syrian refugees were connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, so they actually started to send back Syrians to Turkey, and most of them actually fled quite spontaneously Cairo and other cities in Egypt. So when in 2015 these million people came to Europe, we have seen that in the slipstream, of course, there has been a growth, as the member of the European Parliament says, and also I believe the ambassador, we have seen a growth of populism and extreme right parties. We have seen this in Belgium, the Netherlands, of course, Germany, which was quite with Alternative to Deutschland and Weniger, which was quite shocking to all of us. France, where Le Pen had 33% of the votes, so which was also a first in France. And in Italy, where we have the growth of the Lega party, the League party, by Matteo Salvini, who was after that being deputy prime minister. So, but if we look at the figures themselves, and let me focus now on Belgium. So, in order to put things in perspective, as I said, there are more than 3.5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. In Belgium, there are 16,604 at the end of 2019, which puts Belgium on the 16th place of countries hosting Syrian refugees. If you count the population of Belgium for a bit more than 11 million, 11.46 to be precise, it means that there's one refugee for every 690 people. And if you take the average municipalities or cities in Belgium, which is around 20,000 people, it means that every municipality has 28 Syrian refugees. So the numbers are not a problem. I mean, these numbers are minor. I mean, you cannot say that a city of 20,000 people cannot handle 28 refugees. This is ridiculous. So what is the problem? The problem is not the numbers. The problem is something fundamentally different. And in my opinion, from what I have at least studied, the problem is fear. And this fear factor, has actually been the strategy itself from ISIS in order to put Europeans against Syrian refugees and trying to get refugees going to ISIS territory instead of European territory. If you're interested, I've written down in my paper the strategy of ISIS. It was very clear. In August and certainly September 2015, where most refugees were coming to Europe, actually we saw a massive campaign of ISIS on the internet, where normally they published at that time, they published one video a month to give a message or give some propaganda or whatever. In September they sent out 12 videos, and each of these videos was actually saying to the refugees, don't go to Europe, they're against you. You have to go to ISIS territory. But they didn't do so. They went to Europe, as was the big frustration of ISIS. So what did they do? And what was the reason for the attacks in Europe? It was maybe attacking Europe as such, but more importantly, ISIS wanted to make the link between refugees and terrorism. That was a strategy. And one of the things they've done, I mean, I'm not sure if you remember well, at the stadium in France where one of the attacks actually failed. I mean, one guy blew himself up, and everything was gone about the guy, but his passport was still clean on the ground. His passport with a stamp of Greece, showing that he followed with the refugees the path to Europe, and showing indeed that there's a link between terrorism and refugees. It worked. So the message from Germany and Angela Merkel, where schaffen das, quickly changed in watch out because Syrians and refugees might be terrorists. And one country that has played also a brutal part in this was actually Russia. I mean, Russia today has been spreading and amplifying messages that were actually not true about Syrian refugees raping some Russian-speaking girl in Germany. All newspapers in Germany were full of it. And people started being scared. Remember the festivities in Köln. It's still not clear what exactly happened, but that it was amplified by some non-well-meaning media was very clear. As a result, and this is a research that I have done with the anthropology department of Oxford University, we have asked Muslims in Belgium how they felt in 2016, 2017. As a matter of fact, 82% of them said that they have suffered in Belgium that year or in the years before because they were Muslim. And 68% said that their family had been physically or verbally attacked, publicly humiliated, or has property that has been vandalized. And most of them said it was going to happen again. So what is the problem that was actually coming out of this refugee crisis? Not because of the numbers, but because of the discourse, is that Muslims in Europe are a problem. Refugees in Europe are a problem. So I would like to do 3 policy recommendations in order to, let's say, trying to fight this problem in some way or another. I could have written 10, but I think I've chosen 3. The first one is, I believe, that we need a new economic discourse based on facts and figures. I mean, it is a fact that Western Europe for sure, but also Eastern Europe, where emigration is a problem, is that we will have problems paying our own pensions if some jobs are not going to be filled on a short period of time. We see in the UK right now the supermarkets being empty because there's a problem with drivers. It's a different problem, I know, but we are looking for drivers in Europe. We can't find them. So there are enough drivers, people with a driving license outside Europe, and refugees who have a driving license. Why don't we connect them? This is just one example of actually jobs, vacancies that are not filled in, that can be filled in with people who are actually refugees but should get a chance. The facts and figures, I think, are very clear on this. It is just a matter of being brave enough to talk about these figures and the need of people in order to support European economy. Second, and I believe this is an important one, is I think we need to fight disinformation on EU level. I mean, the fracturing of our society, which I have briefly pointed out, should be fought. And I think perhaps there is a need of some disinformation agency at the EU level who really makes work much more than is the case today to fight the lies and disinformation that have been spread by purpose and amplified by a massive amount of bots, I mean, in several countries that we know very well. So this has to be fought. Third and lastly, I believe, and this is going back to my research I'm doing in philosophy actually, and history, is that we have to support more research that shows us back the reality that was true through many ages, being that Islam and Europe have a long common history. I gave a lecture last night in the KVS in Brussels about the importance of Baghdad and European Renaissance and the revival of the sciences, being mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and so forth. I can talk hours about it, but I think what is important, if we want to change the discourse in Europe, that we also put efforts in this kind of research on which I think much more light and should be shed. Let me finalize with one remark. It's a political one, and indeed it's written down in one chapter that of my book, Tribalization, is that this discourse of the extreme right that we hear everywhere, we see a reaction often from the center parties, mostly the center right, who think we're going to follow a little bit these extreme right parties, hoping that we can get some electorate from them. Those who have tried this actually lost the elections many times. It's a wrong strategy, and more importantly, you make the discourse stronger, this tribal discourse. On the other hand, people like, and I salute him in that way, Macron, or for that matter, Trudeau, have decided to take the opposite discourse. And Merkel as well, saying, we welcome refugees, we're going to solve the problems. And those who have been daring to give that message actually have been winning elections. So I believe it's a lot about discourse, it's a lot about fighting disinformation, and it's a lot about political courage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Deboeuf, for your excellent paper and remarkable ideas. Of course, thank you also for touching upon this extreme, like the rise of extreme right, which is linked to the refugee discourse and the disinformation, especially like the ones also sponsored by Russian or other foreign actors, and as well the role of media in all of these refugee discourse. Thank you for pointing them out, and thank you for your ideas. I think we'll give them to the authorities that could take them on board in our final book that we're going to publish after our project. Yes, and I would like to right now give the floor to Associate Professor Hatice Yazgan, who is from the Çankırı Karatekin University and who is also the Secretary General of ABKAD, or Partner Organization Association in Ankara. What is the perspective of the Turkish side, and can you explain us how the migration agenda evolved, especially during the EU alignment process, and what is the feel today in Turkey about refugees?
Okay, thank you very much. I think my voice is okay. Distinguished guests, first of all, I would like to thank our partner for organizing this event. My presentation will be about migration management of Turkey. First of all, I should say that my colleague will write a policy paper about it. My charge is to present it, and my presentation will be complementary to dear ambassador. And I would like to thank your presentation because you showed us the humanitarian part of the refugee issue. My presentation will be mainly academic, and I will talk about mainly the legislation that Turkey enacted, and it will demonstrate the view of academic and civil society perspective. And in fact, this is a very timely event. because yesterday there was a high-level dialogue between the parties, Turkey and the EU, about migration and security. So first of all, we should say that this is a cooperation area between Turkey and the EU. But I will turn to this cooperation area at the end of the presentation, because we should say that there are some other areas that Turkey and EU can cooperate. And let's turn to the EU impact. We can say that the EU has an utmost impact on the Turkish migration management issue. Because during the history, Turkey was a transit country, but now currently it's both a transit and destination country. But the migration management issue started with the start of the relations between Turkey and the EU in 1960s. One part of the debate is the migration issue was comprising the Turkish citizens' mobility to the EU on the one hand, and on the other hand, with the impact of international events, Turkey became a transit country. And as we've seen in the Syria crisis of 2011, this issue made Europe and Turkey, it forced them to cooperate on migration management issue. So, in fact, this issue, crisis in Syria, was coincided with the stagnation of accession negotiations between Turkey and the EU. And some circles in both Turkey and the EU show this as an opportunity to revive the relations. In fact, Turkey began to prepare for migration management legislation before the Syrian crisis, and this was the EU impact, in fact. And a new migration governance has emerged with the EU impact. And some, according to the literature, this is defined as Turkey has liberalized its migration management, its legislation with the EU impact, with the global affairs, impact of the global affairs, and convenient domestic circumstances. Against this background, I would like to emphasize some of the steps, legislative steps, that Turkey has undertaken. In 1999, after Turkey was proclaimed a candidate country, some main EU documents were released, such as accession partnership documents. And in response to this, we know that there was a national program for the adoption of AKI. All these enabled Turkey to harmonize its legislation with the acquis communautaire. And regarding the migration, I will emphasize some of the milestones that Turkey has enacted to liberalize and to harmonize its legislation with the EU. For example, in 2003, we see the law on work permits of foreigners, which accelerated the procedure for work permits of foreigners. And in 2005, there is the Turkish National Action Plan for Asylum and Migration. This was important because this action plan enabled a roadmap and a timetable for Turkey to do the necessary preparations. And a comprehensive legislation came into force in 2013. It's the Law on Foreigners and International Protection. It entered into force in this year, and this was an important year because there were other agreements that entered into force. I will talk now. And in fact, this legislation was an extension of the action plan. And I will just point out the main issues, like the establishment of a Directorate General of Migration Management under the Ministry of Interior of Turkish Republic. And different types of international protections have been designed with this law. And after that, when we look at the other milestones, there is a readmission agreement signed between Turkey and the EU in 2013. And it was about the procedures for the readmission of the people who entered into the EU territories from Turkey irregularly to the EU. And in parallel with the agreement, we see that there is a visa liberalization dialogue established between Turkey and the EU. I won't go into details because I have a very limited time here, but we see that this roadmap was aiming to establish a visa liberalization dialogue for the easing the Turkish citizens' entry to the European Union. But there were some criteria, about 72 criteria. And there is another joint action plan in 2015. And its aim was to strengthen the cooperation to support the Syrians under temporary protection in Turkey. And here there were commitments of Turkey and commitments of the EU as well. And the EU's obligation was mainly to providing humanitarian assistance to these refugees, and commitments of Turkey were, on the other hand, was about registration of migrants, facilitating the access to public health and education and the other public services. And following this action plan, a further step was EU-Turkey statement of 2016, 18th of March 2016. This is a very important, significant statement. It's also subject to many debates. After this statement, we see that there is a decrease in the number of the refugees going to Europe, going to Greece. But on the other hand, there are some other debated issues here. And there is the 1+1 formula here. I hope, I know most of you know about it. And there is another issue here. The EU promised to disperse 3 billion euros to be spent for the refugees. And facility for refugees in Turkey was established at the same time, and the projects were designed to assist the refugees here. And with these all legislative preparations, we see that visa liberalization roadmap and the customs union modernization that dear ambassador talked about, these were also in the same package, and acceleration of the negotiations were on the table as well. But when we look at the progress, we see that there are also some remaining criteria to be complemented by Turkey concerning the visa liberalization process. And when we look at these legislations, we see that Turkey has really made a good progress in liberalizing its legislation regarding the migration management. On the other hand, we see that there are some partnerships established between Turkey and the EU. My colleague, who is writing the policy paper here, just recommended the education of the Syrian children during the primary school level. So these schools were, in fact, at the beginning, the education was given to these children by Syrian charity organizations. But then these organizations have been embedded in the Turkish national education system. And with the projects, we see that there are lots of projects about integrating these children to the primary schools in Turkey. And according to the current numbers, we see that around 1 million Syrian children, there are 1 million Syrian children at the primary school level, and around 80% of them have been integrated in the Turkish national education system. But there are problems as well. We see that many Syrian children are born in Turkey, and the language barrier is decreasing. But we see that there are other problems, like the need for teachers for traumatized Syrian children, and a little bit there are some issues about language barrier as well. And many things can be done about these children. And in Turkish academic literature, we see some academic work integrating the Syrian workers in the Turkish agricultural sector and the cooperation between Turkey and the EU. But this is also a sensitive issue, integrating the migrants to the society, to the employment sectors. There's some academic work going on in Turkey. And okay, so finally I can say that currently Turkey-EU relations is often described as contractual, and the cooperation between Turkey and the EU seems to be downgraded to the just migration issue, which is not preferable from the perspective of academics and civil society organizations. And Turkey has been declared a candidate country in 1999, and the accession negotiations started in 2005. And 16 negotiation chapters have been opened so far. And there are some chapters that have been blocked. In 2020 and the forthcoming years, there was a positive agenda, but it was not new. In 2012, we see another positive agenda, but there's not much progress here. So in Turkey, there is an academic community, especially focusing on the EU affairs. And this academics and civil society in Turkey would like to participate in the future of the EU discussions. These discussions, these debates may include the climate change issue, digitalization, and the other agenda items of the EU. So we want to be part of these discussions, and the relations couldn't be downgraded, just the migration issue. And this would be my last words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yazgan, for your kind contribution. And we would like to thank Professor İdil Çetin, who is not here with us, for her policy recommendations from the top university. Yes, indeed, it is a big challenge to integrate some 5 million refugees in Turkey, and you rightly mentioned to the education-related problems, or language-related problems, and thank you very much for your policy recommendations once again. So right now we will mention the Afghanistan crisis, because we have a final contribution from Samuel Westerby. Did I pronounce it well, by the way? Who is the managing director of the European Neighborhood Council. And I congratulate you again of becoming father recently. And we will, we actually discussed this issue with Samuel, and we wanted to look into the effects of the Afghanistan crisis and how it would influence the refugee influx to Turkey and the EU, and maybe you can also talk to us a bit more generally about the EU-Turkey relations in general, especially after the Afghanistan crisis. Thanks again.
Can you hear me? Is that okay? So so if I'm a little bit tired, you know why? Having just had a child. So I had the pleasure to write a research paper in the past few weeks, together with a Turkish academic called Fulya Memişoğlu from Yildiz University. And in this research paper, what we tried to do essentially is we compile data from both my own research in Central Asia, which is a kind of a data set of over 600 survey respondents, and we then combine that together with Professor or Associate Professor Memişoğlu's findings from I think about 333 semi-structured interviews with Afghan refugees or Afghan citizens with a protection status within Turkey. Now, what we essentially also try to do with this paper is we try to understand, based on these two data sets and also based on a kind of wider literature review that we do, whether whether there are root causes to the migration which might be more useful, or at least equally useful to tackle for the EU and Turkey in common, which go beyond trying to only tackle migration management. I will get into it a little bit more. Let me start with the question that we asked ourselves is, why is it relevant to understand what's behind migration management? Well, at the core of the problem, when we did the literature review and also looked at many other authors and data from IMF and UN and other agencies, what we understand is, and this is fundamentally backed up with our own research as well, is that regional instability, lacking economic opportunity, different types of humanitarian disaster like drought and so on, but also forced displacement are really at the essence of everything that we're discussing here today. So we started looking at this, theoretically, in the sense that here you have the EU and Turkey dealing with kind of a leaking sink, let's say, not to be impolite about it, but with a major issue in terms of policy and a very, very big spending policy, which nonetheless appears to be fundamentally unsustainable on the longer term. We approached this research like that, and very briefly, we looked at many different kind of data, but I can just mention a few. I have even pictures here, but we don't have a PowerPoint. But for example, things like the level of GDP per capita. When you look at GDP per capita in Afghanistan, not only has it practically stood still for the past 2 decades, but it's also fundamentally lower than even developing country averages, let alone the world average. So then you add this to the fact that you have 60+% humanitarian disaster levels affecting agricultural land in Afghanistan in more than 50% of the country. You add on top of that the fact that the International Terror Index, year by year from 2002 all the way up until 2020, ranks Afghanistan between 1 and 4 in the world continuously. And you start realizing that these 3 so-called push factors for migration that I mentioned before, which we then also do more research on as well, are really a root cause and quite a serious issue to tackle, which necessitates more policy attention than only migration management. So very briefly about Afghanistan and Central Asia, but for all points and purposes, one can easily add Syria into this equation as well, and many others too, that suffer from similar problems. Afghanistan and Central Asia, the figures point to very much a deteriorating situation with potential regional spillover. According to the UN, the figure of IDPs were estimated around 3 million by the end of 2020, while it is now estimated that in the last 6 months, at least from January to July, we have an increase again with over 500,000 in Afghanistan. Approximately 18 million of Afghanistan's population are deemed in need of humanitarian aid. When we looked at the neighboring countries, especially Central Asia, the region I deal with a lot as well in my job, we see both from UN figures, but also from dialogue groups that we had with development workers, with diplomats, and with SME and business people in the region, that all of them confirm over and over again that there is a high level of displacement, that there is high humanitarian need, that whether they're dealing with it in a business perspective or whether they're dealing with it with a development perspective or whether they're dealing in it in a diplomatic perspective, they notice this and they consider it an issue. On top of that, I think it's important to add that COVID-19 only exacerbates this already extremely precarious situation in the region. We did polls and surveys across all of Central Asia, with the exception of Turkmenistan, and it's confirmed that labor migrants, women, children, refugees, and stateless people are the #1 most vulnerable communities. They're the ones who are the most affected both by COVID, but also by the list of precarious issues that I mentioned before. This, of course, we have also semi-structured interviews with so around 400 people also from the region that confirm that these things may also relate to migration, radicalization, lack of education, and all these kind of vulnerable communities that fall into quite difficult situations as a result of lacking humanitarian attention, lacking funding, and sometimes lacking international attention. Now, with regards to tackling the root causes of migration, the study that we conducted with the 330 Afghans in Turkey confirmed that the 62.6% of respondents believe that the primary reason as a push factor to leave Afghanistan to then go to either Turkey or the European Union is economic. 66.3%, which is higher, say violence or different types of threats, abuse, and so forth. Then 34.3% mention rights and freedoms, 28.2% mention family or personal reasons, and then afterwards we have 18.5% that mention access to services, so clean water, electricity, and so forth. So based on all of these kind of things, and I'm kind of going through them quite rapidly because I know we have limited time, we estimate, or at least find it pretty clear, that migration will remain a key policy and a priority both from the EU and Turkey. Looking at the enormous and borderline, not borderline, absolutely catastrophic impact of what I mentioned in terms of figures, it can only stay on the main priority of both the EU and Turkey. Number two, migration management is an important part in order to overcome what I have presented and have been spoken about up here. But the root causes of migration, and here notably the socioeconomic and the violence that I mentioned, and which is fundamentally clear in the figures, is both present and should be tackled much more. And then number three, other policies are necessary in order to be able to tackle these issues. And here we propose in the research some recommendations, notably recommendations for the EU and Turkey to basically try to coordinate a series of policy areas more. Those are development, they are economic development, trade, political and security, and also to have more dialogue, continued dialogue, of course, on migration and everything that goes with this. We have other recommendations and points as well, but perhaps I will go through a few, and then if you have any questions about it, I can also...
You can mention 3 of them.
Okay. So, good, to the point. So first of all, to support international humanitarian missions and corridors and support within conflict areas. And number 2, informing regional countries, partners, Afghanistan, about the need for international humanitarian support, and also doing a lot of this kind of communication and awareness for EU citizens who are not fundamentally aware of the impact that these catastrophic figures will have on the overall region. And then finally, working towards a type of harmonization, and I know this is difficult, it's been mentioned before, but nonetheless, on foreign security, defense, development policy. And here the first steps are really more meetings between TICA and INPA, or the old DEFCO, and other types of meetings of that sort. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel Westerby, for this very comprehensive analysis and for your valuable policy recommendations. Thank you for the 3 policy papers and for all the contributions. So we would like to also take some questions. Yes, Sardar.
Sardar from Euronews Turkish service. sir. I have two questions. My first question is to Mr. Duboeuf, and my second question will be to Mr. Kuneralp. My first question is, you know Turkey, you know the Middle East, you know European Union and Turkey relations. I was wondering, what's your take on that? The latest, the Commission, the DG Enlargement and Neighborhood Policy, put Turkey under the North Africa and Middle East countries, the category of North Africa and Middle East countries. Now it's called Southern Neighborhood and Turkey, where before it was not belonging that category, obviously. What is your take on that? Do you think that was a message, that was the wrong message or the right message, or that was not a message at all? What is your take on that, since you know the area and the region very well? And my second question is to Mr. Kuneralp. Mr. Kuneralp, your era as a representative of Turkey was the last era, actually, that was the most interaction between EU and Turkey was upheld. And I remember that era very well, how intense that was. And now the polls suggest that in Turkey there might be a leadership change. That's the suggestion for now, that it's a possibility. Do you think after 2023 or whatever the date is, the EU-Turkey relations would go back to that stage, and that would lead to that, do you think? Or there is no returning to those days? Thank you very much.
Well, maybe you can answer the question first, Kurt.
Well, I think it's certainly a message, and the message is the, let's say, the accession talks are not just going anywhere now, they will go anywhere in the future. So I think this is briefly the message. So is it the right message? I don't think so, of course, but I've always been in favor of accession of Turkey to the EU for several reasons. But I think in general is that the EU is not seeing clearly anymore concerning enlargement. I mean, we see what's happening in the Balkans, which is quite scandalous in my opinion. I mean, these countries just are ready. They just had to just get the final okay that didn't come. So if the final okay is not coming for Montenegro, for Albania, I mean, how would it come for Turkey? So so things are not going in the right direction. I have many other ideas about it, but I think that answers your questions.
Ambassador Kuneralp.
Well, to build up on the reply that you've just given, I would start by saying that I think it was Mark Twain who said that one should never make predictions, especially when they concern the future. And I think similarly, you know, we, with respect to 2023, what is going to change, what is not going to change, will there be a change of administration, won't there be a change of administration, who might replace the present administration. There are so many unknowns that it is, I think, very difficult to forecast what the impact of that change might be on Turkey-EU relations. What I observe, rather sadly, I have to say, is that the frustration and irritation, disappointment, feeling of humiliation, I could use some other words, about Turkey-EU relations has spread to even the opposition parties. The opposition parties who are challenging the present administration and hope to come to power in some form of coalition after the elections of 2023. So it isn't as if you had, you know, dichotomy between the present administration, which is anti-Europe and or anti-European Union, which it is in some ways and not in other ways, and the opposition which is pro-Europe and pro-improvement of relations with the European Union. I don't perceive that kind of distinction between the two. Plus, of course, you have all the situation inside the European Union, and I think this has been explained by all the speakers this morning, which is not very conducive, to further enlargement and so on. So I would say, as a gut feeling, let's say, that maybe the rhetoric will change after 2023, but in matters of substance, I do not think that there will be a lot of difference compared to the present situation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Thank you. Oğuzhan Sabuncu from Köylöven and
Can you remove your mask, perhaps?
Oğuzhan Sabuncu from Köylöven and a team member of Brook Circle. My question is to Dr. Deboeuf. The new pact on migration and asylum has been criticized by some as lacking the humanitarian aspect of migration. Especially Commissioner Skinas has been really criticized in that regard when he announced the pact. I would like, because you stressed the importance of the humanitarian aspect of migration, I would like to hear more about your take on the pact itself. Would you criticize it? Would you suggest improvements towards it? Thank you for your answer beforehand.
I think that the pact, as far as I have understood, is actually, Europe hasn't been able to have a real common migration and refugee policy since 15. It didn't happen for two reasons. First of all, because some countries in the EU want no refugees, so the distribution, is just not happening. The solution that was found for it is actually not implemented or hardly implemented. So, we can just the details later, but and of course the humanitarian aspect is actually completely absent. So they're always saying we have to do something about the root causes, and I think the humanitarian aspect is one of it. So of course violence, in my opinion, is much more important. Also as you said, than humanitarian problems, and it's a combination of both. But just to say one thing, perhaps, because I also think that the humanitarian side is actually something that has been dealt with apart from anything which is called migration. And I perhaps think it's also a good thing, because humanitarian aid is about humans and it's not about stopping migrants. So, and I must say, when I came back to the EU after having been to Azaz and seeing that camp, I had a conversation with then Georgieva, Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid. And what she actually did was, she said, officially we are not allowed to bring aid to Syria outside of Damascus. So everything has to pass through Damascus. That's how World Humanitarian Aid works. But what she has done, actually, she made a covert humanitarian aid operation, starting to give aid to the north through Turkey. So, of course, with cooperation with Turkey, but actually not making that public. And which was quite, I found that quite amazing. So it shows that the EU is actually capable of, let's say, interpreting international rules when human lives really matter. And I was very happy about that. I'm not sure it happens still now, but I can say, let's keep the two perhaps apart, and let's agree that we are disappointed by European migration, lack of European migration policy in general.
Yes, and actually there is also this human rights corpses right now. They will be accompanying Frontex, so this is also new in the European migration policy. But like member states have to agree, and there's no unanimity, of course. Any other questions or remarks? Well, if you don't have any, I actually think about one question. Maybe we didn't touch upon the migration deal in detail, the 2016 Turkey-EU statement. So after 5 years of the migration deal, do you see that it's working, or like is a revamp necessary, or shall alternative solutions be sought for? Anyone? Professor Yazgan?
In fact, we can see that there is a decrease in the numbers, that the numbers of the migrants crossing the Greek borders. So when we look at from this perspective, yes, it's a success. But on the other hand, there are some debates about this deal or this statement. So I won't go into detail on that. But is there an alternative? I mean, it depends from where you look at. I mean, if the main aim of the EU is to decrease the number of migrants, yes, it's a success and it pays off. But there are some other issues to be corrected, for example, to be complemented. This may be one aspect from humanitarian perspective, and so in fact this is an issue that has to be dealt with a total perspective. I mean, integrating of refugees, the EU policies, humanitarian part of the EU policies, we should evaluate all these together, I think.
Thanks a lot. We'll ask the public again for comments and questions. Mauricio, please.
Hi. Could anyone comment on Cyprus a little bit, if that's going to be a thorn on the discussions between EU and Turkey?
Maybe Ambassador Bozay can reply to this question.
Cyprus, do you hear me now? Okay. Yeah. Cyprus issue it is actually Eastern Mediterranean issue, and there is a legalistic aspect there, and there are two peoples living together, and there was a referendum. The Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots asked to see whether they have the will to live together, and 76% of the Greek Cypriots said that we don't want to live together with Turkish Cypriots, and 65% of the Turkish Cypriots said we would like to live together in the same state. But this was refused, and then later on, though there was no political settlement for this issue, without having a political settlement, now we see that there are some drilling efforts. There are some agreements made by Greek Cypriots to have some activities in the economic exclusive zone of the island. It's a legal dispute, and without solving this dispute in the legal terms, there won't be any solution. And you know, this is also blocking Turkey-EU relations, but Turkey-EU relations is not the only bilateral relations, as the Birth Court mentioned very, eloquently. It's a matter of philosophy, as we're talking about the philosophy of Islam, philosophy of combination of Plato, Aristotle, going Baghdad, coming to Andalus, and then to have the concept of coexistence is very important. And we see, unfortunately, a bad example in the island. Anyway, though we have so many issues in the context of Turkey-EU relations, we are having different dynamics. Now there's a new balance of power in geopolitics, and the question is where EU would like to see Turkey in this new dynamics, in this new equation. 430 million EU, where it would like to see 85 million Turkey in the accession process, in strategic relations, in defense, in security, like what happened in this refugee issue. We see that about the Syrian issue, we had some problems at the beginning, but at the end of the day, we had these, as Professor Yazgan mentioned, on 2015, 2016, we had agreements. And we should also ask, when EU was having these agreements on visa liberalization, customs union modernization, opening chapters, what was the difference between the situation in 2014 and 2016, the Turkish human rights, rule of law, and democracy? And now, when there is a need, when there is a necessity for both sides, we find ways. And there are some issues to be solved, but now we have new clubs. New clubs, what I mean, twin transformation, where Turkey will be in this twin transformation, green transformation, digital transformation, and the question, and we should ask to EU and Turkey, how will we harmonize our legislation, our rules, and in this, multi-dimensional rules-based system needs Turkey and the EU to cooperate in order to be having a unified position. And in that sense, Cyprus issue is an obstacle, but we are having discussions and we are having some more openings. For example, we said that let's have a solution for hydrocarbon issue. Let's have a conference. All the parties to come and talk what will be the sharing of these hydrocarbons. And the dilemma is here. We are having a problem on hydrocarbons, while EU would like to have Fit for 55. And we are talking about some, fossil energy sources, while EU, on the other hand, is looking for some kind of new renewable energy, having decarbonization. There are these dilemmas also to be asked when we talk about Cyprus question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the permanent representative of Turkey to the EU. And thank you also for being also our sponsor, one of our sponsors. Our project is sponsored by the CFCU and EU Directorates of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's funded by the EU, just to remind you. And Kurt, you wanted also to add something to these comments?
Yeah, I would like to say something, actually, a combination of the two questions there about the change of leadership and then Cyprus. In Europe, we talk a lot about European frustrations with Turkey and human rights and so forth and so forth. And I had in 2011 a meeting with Abdullah Gül when he was still president. And he gently pointed out some frustrations from the Turkish side that we might have forgotten. And I think I just would like to mention two. The one is indeed, I mean, when we talk about Cyprus and the Annan plan that has been put to vote on the Cypriotic part, I mean, on the Greek and the Turkish part, and Gül said, we have convinced the Turkish part to vote yes, and the Greek had promised to vote yes too. The thing was that the Turkish voted yes, but the Greeks voted no. What was the result? Bit bizarre is that the Greeks became member of the EU as a separate country and had the veto power to close or not to open chapters in the negotiations of Turkey that started actually the next year in 2006. The second frustration, which I think is very real, is that when the EU decided to start the accession talks in 2006, actually just a few months later, two European leaders, and not the least, it was Sarkozy, President of France, during his election campaign, and Angela Merkel, who was already a chancellor, they both said Turkey will never become member of the EU, just months after the accession talks had officially been opened. And then, of course, they said, like, what is this? And this was long before, let's say, the so-called change of AKP on 2010, 2011, let's say, to become a bit less pro-European and a bit more pro-Middle East, for whatever reason we might think of. And if I would say, I mean, I'm always very eager to try to understand the psychology, also in politics, of the other sides on the negotiation table. And I think, if I look to European politics, I think and I'm not talking about Turkey, but a lot of other countries as well. But certainly if we talk about the relationship with Turkey, I think this kind of psychological things have to be taken into account, and certainly Cyprus is one of them. So to answer your first question, if I may, Ambassador, on the leadership, I do not believe if the leadership changes to whoever it might become, that will change actually anything on the real European position on the accession of Turkey.
Thanks a lot. Any other remarks? Yes, please, Işıl.
Hello, thank you for your remarks, for your presentations. I would like to address my question to Professor Yazgan. Professor, given that you are in daily contact with students and especially young people in Turkey, and given especially that you're from a university in Anatolia, how do you think that young people in Turkey portray the accession process in general and the migration deal especially? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this question. Yes, I'm giving lectures to third and fourth year students mainly. And in Çankırı, it's yes, it's in the Anatolia, and when we look at the profile, mostly they may be interpreted as conservative, or these kinds of beliefs are very dominant. At the beginning of my lectures on the EU affairs, I just asked the students what do they think about the EU, what's their perception of the EU, and at the beginning, firstly, I see that it's not so Eurosceptic, but they are conservative about the EU. They have some questions, some doubts. But after they learn about the academic part of the EU, about academic part of the Turkey-EU relations, for example, customs union and the other issues, technical part, what is the approximation of the legislation, these kinds of things, when they learn about it, they are more optimistic. So I think there is a lack of knowledge on some areas. When this has to be complemented, we can say that the young people are very eager to the EU process. I mean, they can be very enthusiastic, and we have some students, they are going to the Erasmus program, they are participating in the Erasmus programs, and as you participated in one of our programs, Işıl Ergeç has presented a very a wonderful presentation about the opportunities in Brussels, and they are very eager to learn. So when they return from the Erasmus programs, we see that they are very optimistic about the EU. They are optimistic about the EU process of Turkey. So there is a young generation to win on the EU side. Maybe I cannot tell something about specifically about the migration deal. We didn't make an analysis about that, but I can just explain the general perception of the young people like this.
Thanks again. Murat Kavalalı from ABKAD.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank for the Dialogue for Europe and or ELI for the organization and for the help of the running the project properly. And thank you very much. I also would like to thank all the speakers and Mr. Ambassador, Permanent Delegate, for joining us today. Actually, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. After Brexit, now we have the decision of the Polish courts. So we should also think about in the future which European Union we are talking about. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions from the public? Well, I have another one. This will go to Samuel. Because you made all this research about the Afghanistan crisis and its impact, I wonder what is your take on the recent developments? Is it going to lead to another 2015 migration crisis, or, as some other experts say, are the most of the refugees going to stay in the region?
So, first of all, I just came to think about something with regards to one of the questions on Cyprus. What might also be interesting to think about when asking the questions of how Cyprus can be problematic with regards to EU-Turkey relations, I think energy, which was mentioned by Ambassador, is an extremely important variable, but I think it's also good perhaps to think about it even beyond the region and think about where are the other potential energy sources, where could they come from, if not the East Mediterranean basin. I wrote a paper about this 2 years ago for the British RUSI, and we looked at other potential avenues, namely TANAP and the option of Iran, which is of course on hold because of the lacking developments in the JCPOA. But I just mentioned that very briefly because I think it's good to give that context when talking about the break of energy, or the problem of energy within the EU-Turkey-Cyprus relationship. With regards to your question, I think without giving a really long answer, all you need to do, there is no real data coming out in the last few months, which is, it's not credible enough, the data, to be able to say there's a stream of people, of internally displaced people coming to Europe. In fact, there's been a decrease over the last year of people coming from Afghanistan all the way to Europe. So I would not be alarmist of that sort. But there is one new data which I would say is significant to look at, and it's by the UN Humanitarian Office, which shows a spike which is twice as high as anything since 2016 in terms of the numbers of internally displaced people in the last 3 months alone. So make of it what you wish, but these are the two types of data which I think are significant to look at.
Yes, I think with this we are coming to our end of the event, but I'll maybe have a very brief concluding remarks from all of our speakers. Kurt de Boeuf.
I wasn't prepared for that.
You can improvise.
I thought you would summarize everything. So, well, I think every time when I look at this accession, but I'm at the same time pessimistic and hopeful. So I always hope things will change, and actually I still hopeful that it is possible. But indeed, I mean, some small miracle perhaps is necessary, but miracles are possible too. Thank you.
Ambassador Koneral?
I don't think I have anything more to add to what has just been said.
Well, okay, then let me wrap up the session. It's been a pleasure to have this very fruitful discussion. We touched upon many topics. Of course, migration has different dimensions. It goes as far as to security problems. It goes as far to radicalization. It goes as far as the populist discourse and the rise of extreme parties. And of course, like we have to. We concluded that we have to focus more on integration policies, proper integration policies, and finding durable solutions. Because some of the Syrian refugees, and of course, like the second group is the Afghan refugees now, they won't probably go home anytime soon. So instead of having a temporary status, something more adequate might be thought of. And this, of course, can be made only by cooperating, by working together with all the regional actors and all the transit countries and all the, of course, the welcoming countries. So we are in this together, and we are having a serious humanitarian crisis. I think it's important to, as Samuel said, it's important to coordinate not only migration policies between the EU and Turkey, but also the defense, the foreign policy coordination and development coordination. So all the areas are very relevant for refugees and their and their conditions. Sometimes they're really under dire conditions, as we had some experience from the field, as we had some witnesses that visited refugee camps and seen them at their place. Of course, we should not. When we started this project, we thought about what are the most urgent topics to discuss and to agree on, because like Turkey and EU relations were at their height of big disagreements, and like there was little dialogue going on. So we actually thought that this would be the most urgent one. To start a new dialogue and to start a positive agenda. Everyone is talking about the positive agenda right now, but we don't see much action. So someone mentioned yesterday, like we talked with the Commission about the revamp of the customs union, but that's on hold. The visa liberalization is not happening. Like one or two of our speakers could not travel from Turkey because of that, actually. And also the negotiations are not advancing. So I think these also should be taken into account in the partnership between the EU and Turkey. And we would like to continue this dialogue because we think that the civil society has an important role to play. And no matter what the differences are from the political parties or from the countries, we are there to support this dialogue because we believe it's inevitable and it should happen because we are neighbors, first of all, and we have such a long history. Turkey-EU relations date back to 1960s and even before the EU existed itself. So it is an important partner. And well, thank you so much for all these policy recommendations that were very valuable, and we will present them to the Commission and to also during our visits in Turkey in several agencies that are working on these issues. And we'll continue this dialogue in Turkey and in Belgium again on security and migration. Thanks a lot for coming and for being with us, and see you very soon.